here's a soundboard, and every one of these is the same. Each one of these is what you call a channel. And so if you know what one column of knobs does, you know what every knob on this board does, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And each one is associated with a specific instrument or microphone or whatever. So up here you have what's called your trim. And theoretically, they should never move. But one thing you may need to know, if Ed's vocal is really loud, for instance, you may need to turn the trim down if it got knocked. And that way you'll have a picture to know. So the trim determines how much signal of that, like okay, the trim amplifies that signal. This is called a fader. The fader decides how much of that amplified signal it allows to be played, if that makes sense.
Interesting.
So they have a weird kind of proportional relationship to one another. And theoretically, you would want the trim. You want to get the trim as loud as you can on an instrument before it clips. And clip is when when it distorts. If that makes sense. So, and you can see the clip. If that's not muted, that sounds good. If that's not muted and someone's playing, if this was too loud, then right here you'd get a red light every time they hit the really loud part. So that's like the distortion light. It says you need to turn the trim down. If that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Why would you not turn down the fader?
Because it'll still be distorting because you're amplifying that signal here.
Oh.
Does that make sense? So this is just a gatekeeper for that amplified signal.
Can I add something really quick?
Sure.
It helps me to remember that signal runs from the top down.
Yeah.
So it always starts with trims. They'll go through these functions that you'll learn about, and this is your gate at the end. This is the last thing
That allows all of what you've done to happen.
All right, you agree?
So the trim affects the totally
Since you had the most.
There's nothing been done to that signal. It's just straight from that audio source or whatever. Okay. These are called, all these red things are called auxes, and you have 4 auxes on this board. And this is so the way this board is set up now. Aux 1 is the video. Aux 2 is the teaching. And I'm gonna explain what that all means in a second. And Aux 3 is the reverb. So with Aux 1 being the teaching, what that means is, however loud that knob is turned up on any specific instrument, is how much of that instrument is going to the video feed. Does it make sense? So it's like so we want the crowd to be in the video feed, so people don't if they weren't in the video feed, it would just sound like it was Ed or Pop or exactly, sound like a studio. So we want the crowd in there. So right now the crowd's up in Aux 1. What you do to the fader does not affect what happens at the aux. Makes sense? So you can have the fader all the way up or all the way down, and it's still going to go to the video. Also, there's an aux master, and that's over here on this side of the board. And so these red knobs here are the aux masters, and they determine what the overall volume of everything going to. So they are the same for the auxes as this is for the speakers. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So this would control how much is going to the video feed, and this is control how much goes to the speakers. I'll talk about that in a minute. So that's the video. The teaching, you'll always have all of these row 2, these aux 2s are all the way down except for Pop's mic, because obviously it's going to we record the teaching. So there's an output from the back of the board that goes into the computer input that we record the teaching from, if that makes sense. Like I said, if there's any questions, please stop me. You want to make sure these are always set to pre, because what that says, if this is open, if that's out, that little knob right there, if that's out, then it would be controlled by that fader. So for instance, with Pop, we don't ever have him amplified here because he's loud, so we don't need to have him come through our speakers. But if you had that up, and this was down, then he wouldn't be coming through the speakers at all, if that makes sense. So that needs to be in. All those.
What is that called?
Just called pre. It's pre or post fader is what it stands for. Okay, so and then aux 3 is the reverb, and basically what we have is we have a unit in here, right here. This is called the Lexicon Alex, and that is a reverb unit that basically creates echo. And to make if you have a microphone without reverb, it just sounds really dry and in your face. Reverb is kind of forgiving for someone's voice, so it makes their voice sound better than it does really. So this is the reverb, and typically you would only, I guess Ed puts a lot of the guitar to the reverb. So this determines, right here, is determining how much of that instrument is going to reverb. If that makes sense, okay? Then, this is your main reverb output, and it goes, so there's an output back here that goes from this bolt, from this output here to that unit down there. And then there's an output from the unit that goes back into the board. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Because it affects the signal in the unit, it can bring it back into the board. And that return comes into channel 16. So it comes to channel 16. So verb return determines, it's like the master of the reverb. And I'll show you how that works in a little bit. That determines how much of the reverb is heard in the speakers. Now, the reverb going to, okay, so right here you'll see there's a little bit of, in aux 1, there's a little bit of the reverb going to aux 1. Tell me why that would be happening, why we're doing that.
Aux 1 would be.
You want to reverb from the video.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so like if Ed's voice was, or whoever's singing, was going straight into the video feed without any reverb, it would sound awful.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so there's the reverb aux 4. You never need to touch because we're not using it. But you can use it if you wanted to have like a monitor, for instance. Someone wanted a stage monitor so they could hear themselves. Then you could run an aux, and then you would say, Ed would say, "Hey, I need to hear more of my vocal in my monitor." You turn his vocal up in the monitor. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. Okay, so these blue ones are EQ, and they basically affect how that signal sounds. So they add treble, or high end is what we call treble, and mid range and bass to that instrument.
How do they do that?
They have frequency curves inside the board, and you just so this is at 12 kilohertz, the high end. So if you turn that up from the center, is called unity gain on any of these. And that at 12 o'clock, it means you're not adding or taking away any of that frequency. So 12 kilohertz is here is the high end. So right now we're adding a lot of 12 kilohertz to the crowd mic to make it. Cause if you don't, it sounds more muffled. So high end treble makes things sound brighter.
Distort?
No, it won't distort it.
Is that how it how do you add high end?
It could distort it if you crank.
Yeah, if you cranked it, it could distort it.
Gotcha.
Yes,
But it's just adding.
It's changing the input.
It is. I think a way you'll understand it is this is essentially specialized trims. It'll add
For different frequencies. So you think about it like a graph, it's just adding the right side of that graph, and it's boosting those frequencies.
Gotcha.
So that's the high end. The mid range is what is called a sweepable mid, and this is the volume for that mid range, but you can determine the frequency right here. So you'll change the frequency, and then you can add or take out. So for like a vocal, sounds pretty good around 2 kilohertz. So what we've done is we've gone to 2 kilohertz here and boosted a little bit of it for Ed's vocal.
Okay.
The low end is 80 hertz, and it just adds bass or treble. So if you want your guitar to be boomier, then you'd add that. If you want Byron to be boomier, or if he's too boomy, you take it out. And so like the other night, and then okay, so you have all those, and then this. It's called a high pass filter. It says low cut, but it's a high pass filter. And basically what it says is, if you press that in, then it's at 75 hertz. If you press that in, anything below 75 hertz is gone. And a lot of times a low cut or a high pass filter is a really good tool. If you get a lot of woof, like it just sounds, then you can start pressing that on instruments, and it can really clean up your mix. So with, Ryan, I don't know if y'all noticed this on the past couple gatherings, but it was really distorting the speaker up here. And one reason that was happening was because Ryan had too much low end. So I came over to the keys and I put that low cut filter in. And what I did is says, okay, no more anything below 75 hertz for Ryan, which allows, you have to think of it like a funnel. Only so much can go through that funnel. And so he was taking up a really large portion of that funnel. So I got rid of him. So that's EQ. Pan. You won't ever need to touch because we're not in stereo, we're in mono. But if you were in pan, if those speakers were in stereo, if you panned left, it'd be in the left speaker. If you panned right, it'd be in the right speaker. And then the faders determine how much of any specific instrument is going through the speakers. And then the master fader is over here. It's called main LR mix, determines how loud everything is going to the speakers. Does that make sense?
Okay.
So, and then these little buttons here, you shouldn't ever need to touch, but just so you know what they do, they decide where these get routed. So right now, Ed's guitar is going through LR, which is this LR. But you can also create what's called submixes if you wanted to. You don't need to worry about it. I'll just tell you so you know how to troubleshoot. If these were like, if this was in, if Ed's guitar was, for instance, was in 3/4, then you would come over here, and you could do that as a submix. So you could put like, you could say, okay, I want all the guitars to be on submix 1. So you put them in 1, 2, and all the guitars would be on submix 1, which you would then route from here to here and here to here. So you route the submix to the thing. So you could say, okay, I want all the guitars down, like that. So if you had a lot of instruments, if you had a whole drum set, for instance, you could use a submix to say, okay, I want the drums gone. So that's how this whole board works. These you won't ever really need to touch, except if we do outside. You would this tape in. There's a cable in the back of this. This tape in would be like an iPod input, and you would turn that up and this up to get outside. I think that's it with the board. Just so we can look down here, we have a what's called a compressor, and it's got that grill on it, and the compressor basically takes really. Ryan, can you explain that to them what a compressor does? Oh, I get this.
A compressor makes quiet things louder and loud things quiet. Compresses.
So if you don't have a compressor, it can cause distortion because when everybody gets really loud, but the compressor is a gate that says, okay, when Ryan and Ed and John and all of us are playing really loud, it can only allow so much information to go to the speaker. So the compressor does that. It's really more of a limiter, but so we have that in there. We don't ever need to touch it. Then this is the reverb unit. This is Pop's mic receiver right here. You should never need to touch it, just so you know. And that's it down there.
Does his mic receiver go to the compressor?